Hey everyone! I know I posted a few videos recently covering different aspects of the zero cycle, so now that enough of this tech has been explored, I wanted to make a video covering every aspect of specifically the fast zero cycle variation. I want to do a 60-second summary first, and then we'll get into all the fine details. So, the fast zero cycle can be used in Minecraft Java 1.16 speedruns, where the runner enters the end and immediately uses 2 ender pearls to get to and create a 2 obsidian setup with a minimum of 5 beds to kill the dragon as the dragon descends on a predetermined block that the runner already knows the position of. Players must use the existing obsidian pillar below the dragon to achieve the necessary height, and there are 10 possible obsidian pillars that can generate there. Some are more difficult or even impossible to zero cycle with. There's also random end island terrain and initial dragon spawn direction that cause 40% of ends to be impossible to zero cycle in the first place. Of the 60% of remaining ends that can be fast zero cycled, the dragon still has to choose the correct initial angle and low enough target block, so when all is said and done, only 25% of the time a runner enters the end will they be able to pull off a successful fast zero cycle. Strategies for the slow zero cycle, which would work on every single end in every scenario, are still being developed. So the first 3 things I'm going to go over, number 1 is dragon mechanics, number 2 is end island terrain, and number 3 is obsidian pillar generation. Those 3 things are all going to funnel into the next topic, which is statistics, showing these percentages and talking about why I came up with these numbers and exactly how likely getting a successful fast zero cycle is. And lastly, I'll go over some helpful strategies and examples of doing fast zero cycles. Okay, so let's get into dragon mechanics. For this, I'm going to be using my very basic zero cycle practice map, and I also have Matthew Bolan's Dragon Visualizer mod installed. So first things first, when you spawn, in the end, we're going to talk about the dragon spawn mechanics. I'm going to be saving and quitting this world a lot, just so I can explain different ideas, but the dragon, when you save and quit or when you enter the world, is going to spawn around Y128 at the 0-0 position in the end island every single time. If you save and quit, it's going to respawn. It's going to be facing a different angle, and it's going to have a couple different options when it does spawn, and those are going to determine how we fast zero cycle. So there are 4 main things that the dragon has to choose when it initially spawns in that are going to determine a lot. Number 1 is the initial direction. Number 2 is the initial angle. Number 3 is the initial rotation, which we actually don't care about at all. And number 4 is the target block, which is very important. So I'll go through what each of these things mean. So number 1, the initial direction. The dragon looks at the east pillar. We're facing west right now, but from the center of the end island, the entrance that we come in on is at the east pillar, and the west pillar is across from us. So when the dragon first spawns in, it has to choose an initial direction, and that's denoted by this height of this east pillar node versus this y height. Whichever one is larger, the dragon is going to spawn and go that direction. So for this specific end island, as long as these 2 nodes are the same and that one is taller, every time we reset the dragon and it spawns in, it is going to go that direction. And so that's what makes this either a front or a back dragon. So in this specific end island, this is going to be a front dragon every single time. And so that's the initial direction. It's just 2 options. I could show you what a back dragon is going to look like if I manipulate this node. We can't do this in a real run because it would require you saving and quitting the world in order to get this to happen. So we can't do this in RSG, but if I put a block here, the way the game figures out where the node height is it needs to be a certain number of blocks above the lowest non-air block below it, or the highest non-air block. So if I put a block here, basically, it's going to force the node to be a certain number of blocks above, and so now I've forced the game to make this a back dragon. So if I spawned in over in this direction, this node height right here is now lower than the back one. So the dragon sees the back node is higher, and now it's a back dragon. So that's initial direction, and of course if I take this block away and save and quit, we have, again, our front dragon. So that's thing number 1. Thing number 2 is initial angle. When we have a front dragon, it has 2 options. It's either going to be a diagonal angle or a front to back angle. So what that means is it's going to choose its first node. And again, thanks to Matthew Bolan. Thank you a lot for coming up with this mod that helps us visualize the dragon's nodes that it can choose from. This highlighted yellow node block here is where the dragon has first chosen, in this instance, to travel to. And so when it's a front dragon, it has the option to travel front back to this node and circle down to this one, or it has the option to choose the diagonal, this node. And so its angle is set each time. It's a 1/8 chance to go to the front back, and it's a 7/8 chance to go to diagonal. So this is the case for a front spawning dragon. If we look at a back spawning dragon, it's going to be very similar. So now that this node is higher, we get a back dragon. So the back dragon is going to go diagonally 7/8 of the time, and it's going to go front to back to this node 1/8 of the time. So because of that percentage, 7/8 is 88% chance. That means that we can pretty much just hope that the dragon chooses the diagonal node, either the back left or the front right diagonal node, and try to make our setup there. The diagonal nodes are also a lot more convenient to do a setup. If we know the dragon is going to be circling this position, we could do a setup, somewhere up here and try to trigger our beds from here above us so that the dragon dies before it even reaches this node. The front to back, on the other hand, there's not really a pillar over here, so I'm sure a setup can eventually exist, but you would have to get very high above this node and cycle the dragon up here, and there's no real space for us to build over here. So it's not impossible to zero cycle a front to back spawning dragon, but currently there aren't really any setups, and it's unlikely, so none exist so far. So moving on to the last 2 of 4 choices the dragon has when it spawns. The next one is initial rotation, and initial rotation is something we don't really care about. But I will show it here. The dragon has a 50-50 chance to be rotating clockwise or counterclockwise. We do our Obsidian setups so that it intersects the dragon's head directly when it goes in the center of the circle, so it ends up not mattering which rotation the dragon chooses. The last option, which ends up being the most important, is the choice of target block. You see, in this case, the dragon has chosen the yellow diagonal front node as its target node. But that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to get to this node itself. What the game developers did to give the dragon more of a random flight kind of feel is they made the dragon's actual target block above this node anywhere between 0 and 20 blocks. So if I keep respawning the dragon, and as long as I hit the 88% chance for it to spawn on this node, we'll see this orange target block is where the dragon actually has to get to satisfy that it's been to this node. And so this orange target block can be anywhere from 0 to 20 blocks above, and the dragon just needs to get its hitbox within 10 blocks of this orange target block. So it could be very, very high above this target node in order to actually satisfy it. So this is cool because it gives the dragon kind of a random flight feel, which is really fun. It circles around. It's not always flying at the same height. But in terms of a fast zero cycle, this is really, really painful because this time it got a 1/8 front to back spawn, but I'll try to get it diagonal. This variance is a huge problem because this orange target block you can see is pretty high above. So if we tried to make our setup right here and explode beds right here, the dragon would simply satisfy this node and move on. So we wouldn't be able to do it. So this target block is very high above the node below it. But if I keep doing this over and over, eventually I'll get a target block that's much lower, maybe directly on this node, and then I can essentially fast zero cycle from anywhere. I could stand on this position and trigger beds right above here and easily be able to zero cycle. So, the fast zero cycle is an attempt at minimizing dragon RNG, which now we don't have to deal with dragon perch RNG, but the biggest factor is the super annoying target block RNG, which leads to a bunch of complex statistics. Now, things I'm not going to mention in this video are the different dragon phases. I'll talk about them briefly, but the dragon can only be in either a normal phase, a strafe phase, or a perch/perch approach phase. In this mod, when the path is in white, that means the dragon is in normal phase. I'll talk about that more and the statistics that the dragon uses to determine which phase it wants to be in a Speedrunner's Guide to End Fights later. But for now, all you need to know is when you're doing a fast zero cycle, it's only ever going to be in a single phase. This is just an initial normal phase, sometimes called the waiting phase, but it essentially just picks a path of 2 nodes, picks a single target block, and this is all we care about for the entire fast zero cycle. The last thing I wanted to mention is the dragon's dying animation, and actually how the dragon's hitbox behaves when it's flying towards the center of the platform. The dragon still has an active hitbox actually once it's dead. So after you've killed the dragon, it kind of has a bunch of particle effects like this, and it flies down to a center position. You can see there's a target block there, but while the dragon is in this phase, it is kind of alive, and so it has an active hitbox. So if you zero cycle and kill a dragon and it flies into you as it's going to the center, it'll actually knock you back and sometimes kill you. It's happened to me several times, so you don't want to get too greedy and have the dragon too low when you kill it, because it could possibly kill you. But the way the dragon's death animation works is that it flies to basically the lowest target block on the very center 0-0 position, and it has to circle around in order to get there. So this death animation could take about 10 seconds to arrive here and about 10 seconds to actually fly up and die. So this could take a very long time. There is kind of a way we can work around this though. Now this really isn't viable for single player. Maybe if you tool assisted a run like this, you could do something like this, but because the dragon chooses a target block that is essentially the lowest non-air block right here, you could essentially just make a really tall pillar. If you were in like co-ops or something, or you had a tool assisted or a glitch run or something, you could just fill up the 0-0 position with any block you want. And then when you did a fast zero cycle, the dragon would just zoom right to this position. So again, I've just filled up the center pillar, and now when I kill this dragon from up here, it's just going to do a quick spiral and then reach here. So, you know, maybe in co-op, if you have a second person and they can build up here, or maybe someone will figure out a really smart way to achieve this and get the center 0-0 position filled up with some solid block before you do this cycle. You could save 10 to 15 seconds on the entire end fight. This unfortunately does have to be done before the dragon begins its death animation. So if you're up here and you kind of do the last bed and the dragon's in the dying animation, you can't actually come over here and start pillaring up. It'll choose its target block on the last bed hit. So you unfortunately have to do this before you finish killing the dragon. All right, so that's it for dragon mechanics. I want to talk about end island terrain. There are 2 end island generation terrain effects that can mess up our fast zero cycle and change the statistics a bit. Number 1 is these nodes are actually chosen based on the end island around them. So they're not actually the same Y height every time. As we can see, this first diagonal node, which this dragon is going to right now, is at Y74, and if we go down to the ground level and look at this block, this is 58. These nodes are chosen to be 16 blocks above the ground below them. And so if I go to all these other diagonal nodes that the dragon could choose, they are also going to be exactly 16 blocks above the end island below them. And so this again creates some randomness, which is cool from a game design perspective, but makes the fast zero cycle a little more complicated. So you can see from the initial perch platform, if this block is at Y61, a lot of the times the terrain will go down about 2 levels on average before you get to this position. So if that's 61, it goes down to 59, and so we get roughly similar height here for this node every time. But if we have like a little divot like this or something, this is a lot better for us, because now the node is much lower and we have a lot more time until the dragon gets to it on average. But if we have something that's elevated like this, this is a lot worse. So we can actually have a variance of like 10 blocks pretty easily up or down on that first node. And so sometimes you get really unlucky and it's very hard to zero cycle. The dragon just flies away. Sometimes you get really lucky with a very low end island below, and you can zero cycle nearly 100% of the time. So the second way the end island generation can affect our fast zero cycle is what type of end stone is around this obsidian pillar when you first spawn in the end. So when the player first steps into the end and generates this obsidian platform, there's a space of air that is forced around the player as well. But this obsidian platform always spawns at x100, y49, and z0. But the end island around it is somewhat random. So I've taken all of the kind of possibilities and split up the different types of end platform generation that you can see in a run into 5 different types, and they're roughly equal probability. This is an approximation, but from what I've seen, this is close to the real thing. So the first one is open and void. So this kind of end platform happens when there's no end stone around you at all, and the end island is, at least like 20-30 blocks away. Most of the time you have to pearl in this case. The second end platform option is open and end stone, and this one is when you're kind of 0 or 5 blocks away from a very nice end stone platform that leads up right up next to your platform. So you don't have to throw a pearl and you can walk right onto the end island. The third option I would call the overhang, and that's where you're not completely encased in end stone, but you do have end stone somewhat above you, and so sometimes you have to do an awkward pillar or bridge out to the side and then pearl onto the island. In this case, I would consider this roughly a 2-second time loss. Your fourth option is the end cage, where you're encased in end stone and you have to dig up, but you only have 1 to 4 blocks above you that you have to dig up, and so it ends up not taking too long. I would roughly consider this about a 7-second time loss with a gold pick before you can pearl onto the island. And the fifth option is the kind of heavier end cage spawn, where you're encased in 5 or more blocks of end stone that you have to mine up. So that is going to take you longer to mine even with a gold pick, but with a gold pick it would be roughly 12-second time loss before you can pearl onto the island. Okay, so that's all for end island terrain. Now we can go on and talk about the obsidian pillar generation in the end, because the obsidian pillar is going to dictate a lot of how we do our fast zero cycle. So I talked about this in a previous video, but I'll explain it a little more. There are exactly 10 different obsidian pillars that spawn every time in every end island. The only difference is between ends that they are randomly distributed. So for instance, the game developer said this I want to be tower A and this is tower B. Sometimes tower A is going to be here and tower B is here, but other times tower A is going to be there, tower B is going to be here, and so on. And so there's exactly 10 different obsidian towers that all have their individual specific Y heights and widths. They just spawn in a different random orientation each time. So we can use that information to our advantage and know which tower we get in which position, and that'll help us build a setup that can work for that tower in a fast zero cycle. So when we enter the end and we're ready to fast zero cycle, we really only care about one obsidian pillar of the 10. We don't care about the other 9 pillars. We just want to know about our single obsidian pillar. So in this case, when we get a front dragon, we would only care about this single pillar and where the node is compared to this one. When we get a back dragon, we don't care about anything else besides this one pillar and this node that's right next to it. So let's just say, in this case, we do have a front dragon and we want to work with this specific pillar. We need to know where this node is relative to the pillar. So when you go from the end crystal, it's always going to be, when you go out in diagonal blocks, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 block in front of that. And this is going to be where our node is. So if we do this block, it's going to be right here. So this works for any pillar. So I'll do this for the back one in this node if the dragon was a back spawning dragon, but we go out 1 diagonal, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 block here. So this is going to be where our node is positioned here. So this works for every single pillar. You go 4 diagonal and 1 closer to you, and each of these pillars, if we're at the spawning fountain, if we go to this pillar, the diagonal node is going to be in the front left. And if we go to this back pillar, the diagonal node is again going to be in the front left. Okay, so now we can talk about all of the 10 individual obsidian pillars if you did happen to get that obsidian pillar in the spot where you need to do a fast zero cycle. And we'll talk about the optimal places to stand and build a setup in order to get the best chance of success on a zero cycle. I showed off this map in a previous video, but this is just my zero cycle pillars explanation map that I'll have a link to in the download Link to download that into the description in this one as well. But this just shows all of the 10 individual pillars. I kind of named them, talk about their Y height, and I showed the setup for each of them. So we'll talk about this first one. I called him Small Boy. It's a width of 5 Obsidian. If you're standing on it, the Y height is 76. And ideally, you want to build up a setup so that you can stand on position 87. So these setups you can make however you want, but for instance, if this is my front right pillar and the node is over here to the front left, we already know the node is going to be 1 diagonal, 2 diagonal, 3 diagonal, 4, and then right here. So we want to basically have our Obsidian, I hope how I set it up here, so that the Obsidian is set up directly in front and that the pillow of the bed is directly over the node where the dragon's circling. This will make it so that when the dragon does kind of a wide swoop and comes in to circle down, its head hitbox is going to be directly over the head of the pillow. So that's what we want to do. So you can make this setup however you want, but you know, for this instance, I start off putting a block in this corner spot, going out 2, and then just going up to the Y height that I thought was pretty appropriate for this one. The difficulty with this is if you go too low, the dragon might fly away before it gets to you. So you want to go high up, but the difficulty with the smallest one is that, you know, it takes a while to pillar up, and so you can't get much higher than this before the dragon gets to you. It would be nice to go to, you know, we'll see that standing block 91 is a pretty optimal setup for most of these, but you simply just can't pillar up this quickly until the dragon hits you. So Y87 is what I found a good spot to stand on, and then you just want to build a couple blocks more, put your Obsidian there, drop down here, and then start chaining bed hits. So I'm going to be showing a table of all 10 Obsidian pillars, what I've named them, their width and height, and then I'm going to have a column for the standing block, the optimal standing block, and then chance of success. So what the standing block means is where I have to be standing in order to trigger a bed above myself on pre-made Obsidian, in order to give myself the best odds of zero cycling without destroying this crystal. So the reason this says greater than 80 is if I was standing on block 80, let's say right about here, and I triggered a bed at the optimal position, it would be too close to this crystal and the crystal would explode. And so you can't really cover up the crystal with obsidian or water or anything. If you put a bed, it doesn't matter what's blocking the crystal, it will still explode if it sees an explosion within a certain amount of blocks from it, which is really unfortunate because if this crystal does explode while you're doing the zero cycle, the dragon will no longer be on normal phase, it will go to strafe phase. It'll then fireball you, which is a problem because then there's dragon's breath on you, but then it'll choose a different node to fly to. So it'll no longer be circling down the same node. So we basically have to make a setup so that we're as high as we can get, so we have the most likely chance of zero cycling, but we can't be close enough to this crystal to destroy it. And so that's what the standing block is. I've done experiments on all of these towers, and you have to be at least above standing block Y80 and looking up and triggering a bed above yourself in order for this crystal to not explode. And so the optimal standing block, we want to get higher, and so that's 87. And so given an average node position and an average or a bunch of different possible target blocks, I've calculated the chance of success if you're standing on block Y height 87 to be about 25%. So what that means is that chance of success is just purely the dragon already circling down on you, and it picks a random target block. So 25% of the time when you're standing on Y87 and triggering a bed from here, the dragon will continue circling down because its target block is very low. 75% of the time though, when we do this bed, the dragon's target block is going to be, you know, around this Y height or higher, and so it's just going to fly off, and so we actually can't even do the zero cycle. So that's what that right column means. We'll go through each pillar. Okay, so the next one up is small cage. This one, again, if you're standing on it, you would be standing on Y79. And this one's pretty simple. You have to get to at least standing block 83 and make your setup above that in order to trigger beds. So I've come up with, you can get to block 91 to stand on before the dragon gets to you. It's going to be close, but if you can pearl right on top of these iron bars, it's a little difficult, but if you can pearl up here and you get a front right tower, you can get up here and build up here before the dragon gets to you, and you would have a 45% chance of success if you're standing on block 91. So the next tallest one is the second cage. This is the tall cage. You'd be standing on Y82 if you're on it, and this one is the same as the small cage, except you can build 3 blocks higher. You'll notice the starting obsidian block for this is 3 blocks higher, so if you can pearl onto these iron bars and make it up, you can also get to the setup just barely in time before the dragon gets to you. It's the same amount of blocks as the other one because you're going up the same height, but this one just starts 3 blocks higher, so it's a little easier, and standing on block 94 actually gives you a 60% chance of success. So again, you want to get as high up as you can, so that's why I recommend doing Y94. Now the next 3 are the medium pillars, and this one is on Y85, so this one's called M85. This one is pretty nice because you can pearl right on top of this. As long as you don't hit the crystal and explode it with your pearl, that would destroy the 0 cycle, but if you pearl to the side of it, you can pillar up and be standing on Y94, which gives you pretty solid odds, 60% chance of success just based on the dragon's random choice of target block. So this one is pretty comfortable. You can get here before the dragon a pretty good amount of the time. This next one is another medium one. This is M88, and for this one you can again also stand on 94 before the dragon gets to you. The last one, M91, is a little more difficult though. This one is actually so tall where we're getting into kind of dangerous territory. You can barely do a really good pearl up to the top of this one and build up all the way to Y97, although it's a little tricky to get up here before the dragon gets to you. You have to have pretty perfect play, and this has to be a front pillar in order to make this work. The reason you can't actually do any lower, we can try, let's see, this would be, if we were standing on Y94 instead of Y97, the bed would be triggered here. So if we were to only go up to Y94 and trigger bed, it destroys the crystal. So this is the first pretty tough tower. You have to be perfect to get up high enough to Y97, which gets you a 75% chance of success, which is really nice. But you can't be any lower than that, or else the crystal's going to be destroyed. Now we're getting into the tricky area where we have towers that are just an awkward height. And so this is the first of the 3 tall towers. It has a width of 9. This is T94, and there's no setup that I currently have. The reason being is that we're running into the same issue as this one, where we have to pillar up really tall. In this case, you have to do a perfect pearl to get up here and pillar up too high. The dragon is just simply going to run into you. There's no way to pillar up 10 or so blocks on this one before the dragon runs into you. The dragon spawns at Y128, so no matter where you spawn in the end, you simply cannot pillar up in this one. So now that the towers are getting too tall, we have another strategy where, you know, the node is going to be to the front left of this. We could potentially pearl halfway up this tower and then put some obsidian here and do beds from here. The issue is this tower is now too short though for this strategy, because once the dragon gets to around this position, it's very, very likely just going to move on. If your standing block is below 85 or 83 or something, which would be right here, the dragon is just going to fly away and you'll never have a chance to get it, no matter where the target block, even if the target block is really low, you just can't do it. So the problem is this tower is directly in the middle. It's too tall where we can't pillar up, but it's too short, and if we were to trigger a bed from here, it would destroy the crystal. So unfortunately there's no setup for this one. Going on to the next 2 tall towers though, this one is just barely 0 cyclable. Again, this one is taller, it's T97. You can't pillar up, but you could go on the side of this one and trigger a bed from here. If you triggered a bed where your standing block is 85, it will not destroy the crystal, but if you're any higher, let's say 2 more higher, it is going to destroy the crystal. I know that's a really long distance, but these crystals are very fragile and you can't protect them in any way from a bed explosion. So unfortunately, this one has to be standing block Y85, which is low. We want to be higher to give ourselves better odds. So standing on Y85 only gives us a 15% chance that the dragon will stay there long enough where we can zero cycle. So unfortunately, not a high percentage. Of the last two, this one is the last of the tall towers, is T100. This time we can stand a little bit higher up. We can stand on Y87, and we can't go any higher. If we go higher than 88, the crystal will explode. So this gives us a 25% chance of working. And last but not least, it's big boy, Y103, width of 11. You can stand on Y91, which gives us a 45% chance the dragon will stay there, which is really nice. But this one is actually a bit awkward. So there's something weird with this one where it's so large. If you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1 out, the target node is going to be right here, which is just awkwardly close to this obsidian. So the perfect spot to put this obsidian in order to one cycle would be, I believe, like right here or something, or right here maybe. And you would have to trigger beds from here, but the issue is the head is so close to obsidian that the obsidian actually blocks a lot of damage. So this tower, this pillar is just a little too wide and it makes it really awkward. So this setup is the only one that's actually one off of where the node should be. The node would be right here, but this helps get you decent damage, and so it's not going to be directly on the dragon's head. You won't be able to 5-bed this one. It's going to be more like a 7-bed, but it is very doable, and at Y91 it's got a decent odd of working. Okay, so now that we know the main 3 factors contributing to the fast zero cycle, we know about dragon mechanics, we know about end island terrain, and we know about obsidian pillar generation, we can finally answer the question, exactly how likely is it to get a successful fast zero cycle? So if we imagine this bar is 100% of all end plus dragon combinations in random seeds in the entire game, 10% of those we immediately cannot fast zero cycle, because the pillar that the dragon goes to is on the 1 out of the 10 pillars that we do not have a setup for. So that immediately throws out 10% of all combinations. Of the next, there's 7.5% where we get a combination of a back dragon plus a bad pillar height. There are 3 of the 10 obsidian pillars that are fairly tricky. They're the middle height ones that you have to pearl up to and build on top of. In order to get a position to zero cycle, you can't go lower because the crystal is there. So in this case, if we get a back dragon, which happens 50% of the time, we simply can't zero cycle because we can't get there in time. With the front dragon, we could just barely make it, but the back dragon has a few more seconds of time loss, and so those ends will not be fast zero cyclable. There's 13.5% that we also can't do because we get a back dragon plus a cage spawn. So there are now 6 obsidian pillars in this category that we can't do a fast zero cycle on because the cage spawn, if there's too much end stone around us, is way too much of a time loss. Again, it's anywhere from 5 to 12 seconds of time loss even with a gold pick, and that is simply just too much time for us to get to that back left dragon on that node and do a fast zero cycle. The last part is this 9% front dragon cage spawn. So again, the cage has the biggest time loss of any factor, and so there are a couple obsidian pillars where we simply just don't have enough time to get there, even if it's a front dragon and we could throw a pearl as soon as we dig up and then a pearl up to the tower or the pillar, we still can't get there in time. So that's kind of a big chunk of different end plus dragon combinations, but in the end, we're left with a kind of a nice number still, 60% success rate, not including dragon RNG. So what this 60% means is that if you look at all end island plus dragon front to back spawning combinations in the game, if we have infinite opportunities to do a fast zero cycle, we will be able to do that 60% of any seed. So some of those are really, really difficult, and it's going to take us, 50 or 100 attempts to do it. But if we have infinite attempts, we will be able to fast zero cycle 60% of seeds. So that's a pretty decent number. And that number could get higher as we get better and better strategies for doing setups. Okay, so now we can include Dragon RNG into the mix, which is going to take out a lot of our possible options for a fast zero cycle. The first thing that could go wrong is, if the Dragon chooses that 1/8 chance to go to a front to back node instead of a diagonal one, we don't have a setup there, so that immediately means we can't actually do the zero cycle on that specific dragon. And the last one, which is a big chunk of this, is if the dragon chooses a random target block that is too high. So some of these setups have to avoid damaging the crystal, and we need enough time to get to the setup. So some of the setups are going to be very low, which gives the dragon a pretty high percentage of choosing a target block that's just a bit too high. Some of these setups, 15 out of those 20 blocks that it can choose are too high, and before it gets to our bed, it's just going to fly away. So we have a low likelihood of actually completing the zero cycle. So when all is said and done, we have a 25% success given any end plus dragon combination and given the dragon's choice of node and target block. So 1 out of 4 attempts, if we have absolutely perfect play, when we enter a completely random end, we'll actually be able to pull off a successful zero cycle. And of this 25%, some of this is much easier and some of this is much harder. I'd say roughly like 10% of ends are fairly straightforward. You have to do a pretty standard setup. You have a few options of target blocks where you'll still be okay, and you have some extra time. You can eat some food before you trigger the first bed, stuff like that. I'd say maybe 15% of the remaining total is really, really difficult. You'd have to have really perfect play, pearl exactly on point. You can't make a single mistake. You have to have full health and probably 6 to 7 beds to be comfortable with them. So 25% is a nice number. 1 out of 4, I think, is something that is definitely worth going for. I think top runners that are going for, sub 15 type times or better, or FSG or SRG runners that are going for like a world record type run, really should learn this. And it's much better in set seed when you can go in the end beforehand and already figure out which tower you have, what height you need to build up to. So it's a lot easier, but this can be used in any kind of category. So I think it's worthwhile. Okay, so that's pretty much all the information I have for the fast zero cycle. I wanted this last section to be an example and kind of some helpful strategies for doing this in an actual run. So I have a seed here. I posted a video recently on doing fast zero cycles on top RSG runs, and I included N Emerald's recent PB run because it was 5th place, even though it wasn't on the leaderboards. And some of you mentioned that K4 and Illumina also had runs that were in the top 10 that are not on the leaderboards yet. So I couldn't find K4's seed. I didn't see it in the video, but I did find Illumina's on his alt account. So this is Illumina's seed here. We'll step into the end, and I'm basically going to show you my thought process when I first see kind of a random end island. So first things first, there's 5 different kind of end platforms that can spawn in general. So this one is probably number 2. We have a really nice end stone, so we can just pearl and then do a second pearl to a tower. We also have a nice front dragon, so the first 2 things very good on this seed. This tower looks a little bit awkward though, so I don't exactly have every single tower height memorized just by looking at it from the ground, but this looks like a fairly tall tower, so we might actually not be able to do this one, or we may have to do like a low setup. So if I was in an actual run, I wouldn't know, and so what I would do is when I would spawn in, I would guess that this tower is too tall, and then we have to do a low setup. So I would pearl around here, I would run to here, I would pearl up the side, and either hit beds if I was standing at about 85 or 87. Looking at it here, you'd probably have to be lower at 85. So this tower is 97. So this is T97. So the tower that we don't have a setup for is T94. So this is good. T97 means, if we look at our little spreadsheet here, that means we have to do our setup standing on block 85. So right about here, and then we make our setup here, and then do the cycle here. So it takes a little bit to get used to the different tower heights, and a lot of times you have to roughly guess. Like I wouldn't have known this was T97. This you know, could have fooled me. It looked like T94 anyway. We might not have had a setup for it. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself the same materials that Illumina had upon entering. I looked at his inventory. He did have 7 beds, a bunch of crying obsidian, and some soul sand and food, and like 7 ender pearls. So I'm going to give myself that. I'm going to try this end multiple times until I get the successful 0 cycle, and I'm going to just show you the whole number of attempts. I could embarrass myself, I could mess this up a bunch, but I want to show you guys exactly how long it takes me after having practiced this for many hours, how long it takes me to do an end just like this from scratch. Okay, so here's my very first attempt at this, and I want to point out from the percent chance of success, there's only about 15% because we have to do this setup so low and avoid destroying the crystal that it's probably going to take me multiple times even to get to the position to start 0 cycling. The dragon's probably going to fly away before I get to that first bed. So this first attempt, I went to the wrong height. The soul sand height kind of messed me up. I should be standing on 85, except I'm standing on 87. So this is my novice mistake. And you can see here I destroyed the crystal because I was standing 2 blocks high. So the first run died to me making a mistake. Okay, here's my second attempt. And this one, I figured out my mistake from the first time and actually went to the correct block to stand on. But again, this dragon is going to hit 1 out of the 85% chance to just fly away. So I'll show you what that looks like. Yeah, only 15% of the time this is going to work. So the dragon's going to do a couple circles, and we can't see the node here, but it does hit this target node. And so the node is satisfied and it just flies away. So on to the next attempt. All right, on this third attempt, I do actually get lucky enough where the dragon chooses a fairly low target block, and I am actually able to start the cycle. You can kind of see the end stone on the end island here goes a little bit, it dips a little bit down towards this pillar. So that's actually giving me probably a better than average. So instead of 15%, this one is probably closer to 20, maybe 25% success rate, just because that end stone is a little bit lower. So I do get lucky. The dragon rolls a lower target block, and I am able to start the cycle. And I said I'd show you all my attempts, and I wish I was a hero and did it here, but unfortunately, on this 4th bed right here, it just wasn't a great timing. The 3rd and 4th bed was just a bad timing on my part, so I failed that one. I should have got it on the 3rd attempt, but unfortunate. On to the next one. All right, on attempt number 4, I'm happy to say that I finally actually completed the 0 cycle. So that pearl right there, I would highly suggest waiting 2 or 3 seconds, depending on how good your CPU is, when you enter the end to let the chunks load. Pearl trajectory is really weird when you don't let the chunks load fully, so that one was a little awkward on the pearl, and I made a second mistake here by placing an obsidian in the wrong spot, but you can recover. So I recover here, and I was able to get this first bed hit off and chain the rest of the beds. On the previous attempt, I wanted to get a 5 or a 6 bed, so I got a little bit greedy on the 3rd and 4th one, but on this time I'm like, you know what, Illumina had 7 beds, I'm just going to make sure I get the full knockback, trigger these beds a bit late, which is less damage, but hey, I have 7, so I'm just going to use them all. So it was a little slower, a little more beds, but hey, we did it on the 4th attempt. So, you know, 2 out of 4 attempts failed because of my mistakes and not having practiced this enough, and one of these was dragon target block RNG. So honestly, 1 out of 4 attempts on this particular end is not too bad. Pretty solid end fight. So yeah, fast 0 cycle is 100% viable right now for top earners to use. It's difficult, it's unlikely, but it works some of the time. And imagine pulling this off in a PB run. I mean, people would just lose it. So it takes a lot of practice. Again, I have links to the timing practice and the pillar practice maps and Matthew Bolan's mod to help understand the dragon pathing in the description below. And as always, hope you enjoyed and have fun with the fast 0 cycle.